Our next guest today is Julia Long. Everyone who was kind of arguing the point, who'd actually looked into it, could see all the problems. So what happened then on the ground, Julia?
Okay, so yeah, that was absolutely brilliant getting that history and just reminding Sheila, just reminding us there of the clarity of some of those contributions to the debate at the time, which is a clarity that has been really very much lacking, even from the some quarters of the so-called like gender critical movement. They haven't necessarily been as clear as some of those early politicians were. And in fact, just as Sheila was talking, I reached behind me. This is going back a little bit further. I reached behind me for to my I've got a thing to blur my screen, but anyway, it's my to my Oxford English Dictionary, which it dates back to 1991, that version, and it's just really helpful, I think, to remember a time when that word transgender, it just actually didn't exist. It wasn't even present in the dictionary. Like, this dictionary goes from transfuse to transgenic. The word transgender didn't even exist. If the word transsexual is in there, but it's got quite a nice definition of something like, the physical attributes of one sex and the supposed psychological attributes of another. So whoever wrote that, I think they kind of knew what time of day it was as well. So I think that's one of the things that is really very frightening about what's happened, is that for a generation, or probably coming up now, even getting on for maybe a couple of generations of children, will be growing up thinking that there is this thing called transgenderism, and there are people who are trans, and that's it. That is part of their worldview. And I think that's why so many of us, who obviously some of us were very kind of mobilized and politicized around this a long time ago. But I think it's not surprising that a lot of the women who are very much involved, not universally, but a lot of the women who are involved now in opposing it, just remember a time when it actually didn't exist. That we didn't have it, and there weren't all these children, desperately, suicidal because they wanted to, cut parts of their body off and all this kind of thing. Anyway, sorry, I just went back to just indulge myself in that little trip down memory lane to a time before it all. Before me does now. I would say, for me personally, I wasn't living here either. I was in Ireland at the time, and I honestly can't remember how aware I was of this, the GRA. I don't. I'm ashamed to say that I think if I was in any way aware, I just thought it was a very obscure, marginal thing. I honestly can't remember. This is me kind of supposing now. But when my eyes were really open to it, and as usual, I really have to credit Sheila with this. It was in 2006 when I'd come over. I was planning to move back from Ireland then, and I'd come over for Sheila will remember this, the Andrea Dworkin Memorial Conference at Oxford University, the year after Andrea Dworkin had died, and Sheila was speaking at it. But as I remember, Sheila can correct me afterwards. As I remember, the presentation was mainly about beauty practices. That's my recollection of it, and particularly looking at Andrea Dworkin's book Woman Hating. But Sheila did then also talk about some of the. I remember her talking about Norman Tebbett's contribution and talking about this debate, and that was, I suppose, that was really my wake up moment to like what had happened and what had been allowed to happen, and to just start to begin to get a sense of the implications of all of that. So that was really my wake up moment. And then I suppose
what year was that? Sorry, Julie.
So that was 2006. So that was a couple of years after the GRA had passed. And then I did move back to London, and like, this is obviously just my own sort of personal involvement. I was very much involved when I came back to London. I was very much involved with anti-pornography activism and sort of broader anti-sex industry and anti-sex industry sort of activism, feminist activism. And I suppose when I really became directly involved was when Sheila and I, and there were various other women involved, were organising Radfem 2012. And I think that's a really important era for women to be aware of. And I remember I'd met Sheila just the year before, and we were both in complete agreement of how necessary it was to have women-only spaces again, and women-only events, and women-only organising. And I suppose at the time I was coming from it, from an experience of this kind of new generation of maybe not liberal feminists, because they were anti-porn, anti-prostitution, but they were very inflected by some of the norms of liberal feminism that had kind of, come to dominate. And one of the things that a lot of them believed was that, we have to involve men in our activism, because the logic, the so-called inverted commas logic, was that, because if we want society to change, men are half the population, so we have to involve them with everything, otherwise society is not going to change. That was the kind of attitude, and it was really quite difficult to convince them otherwise. And I just spent several years getting really so angry and frustrated, and I just felt we really need to have a women only some kind of event to get us back onto a more radical feminist analysis and sort of pathway. So that's when we had the idea of doing Radfem 2012. That was going to be the first absolutely uncompromisingly, unequivocally women only event for a long time. I don't know when the last thing, I think it probably been for a good sort of 20-25 years since that sort of thing had happened in that public way. Anyway, I'll try and be quick with it. I did write I wrote a piece for Female Erasure, which is a really important book that came out in 2016. I did write about this in Female Erasure. But anyway, I just remember it was a pretty stressful time for me, because I started a really responsible job, and I was moving house all at the same time. I was doing this conference, and we put the website up saying that it was women only. It went up, the conference was due in the July, and we put the website up in the May, about the middle of May. And then, I don't know, I went to bed, and then I woke up the next morning to this like absolute kind of pandemonium that some awful trans activists in America, someone had put it on Twitter, it had been picked up. And then we were that was the beginning of being absolutely besieged by all of these terrible trans activists and handmaidens that were just going to do their absolute damnedest to try and stop us having that. And I think that event was really such a wake-up call for a lot of women to see that, and we've seen it since now. You go to a Let Women Speak event and you get all this, fascist, Nazi, all of that kind of stuff. And that's what we got. It was a hate rally. It was a Nazi hate festival. And the thing was then, now there is obviously quite a considerable movement, but at the time, pretty much everyone was either against us or just completely silent about it. So at the time, there were these so-called sort of new voices in feminism, like Laura Bates. I don't know if you remember. I don't really hear so much of her now. She had a book called Everyday Sexism. There were all these kind of women all posting about how this was terrible. We should be ashamed. It shouldn't go ahead. And this this really awful man called Ros Caveney, who was one of the main sort of ones who were definitely out to sabotage the event. He went to our venue and said that it shouldn't go ahead, and he was very, very exercised about not wanting Sheila to speak, because this man was very much from the kind of older, I don't know, 1980s. He was like this awful, like pro BDSM, pro sex work, awful man in a dress who had a massive grudge against Sheila in particular, because she actually had, very clearly and rightly stood up to challenge him. So he was determined that we wouldn't have our event, and he wrote this really vicious piece for The Guardian, which I remember then Sheila did write a response to. He was, but the other interesting thing about, because we were supposed to have the event in Conway Hall, and Conway Hall had hosted all kinds of events. They really sort of prided themselves on being this, very open, free speech kind of, they didn't use the term at the time, but, you know, in inverted commas, inclusive venue, they'd had like the IRA, I believe they'd actually even had PI, you know, the paedophile information. I think we even found sort of, you know, images of that. So they had all of that. And then, you know, a group of women wanting to talk about male violence and prostitution and, you know, all the things that we were going to talk about, we had to not be allowed to have it. And it was really interesting to see, like, you know, some of the prominent feminists, well, a couple of the prominent feminists who were going to speak at that pulled out. Gail Dines still spoke at it. And, you know, the event went ahead, but we had to go to a secret venue because it was just too dangerous Conway Hall pulled out. And then
but they did host other events after, didn't they?
They did subsequently. Yeah, they did subsequently.
Okay.
What I was going to say was it was actually the chair of it was this pretty unpleasant character. Again, like, it just exposes all the politics. A humanist. He was I think it was the chair of the British Humanist. His name's something like Andrew Mawson or Hobson, and someone in the chat might know. Anyway, he was absolutely determined it wouldn't go ahead. And to be honest, we were on a quite tight time frame. We just went to a secret venue, and there were some very, very prominent, still very prominent feminists now who really disagreed with us about that. And I got some pretty unpleasant emails about how I was destroying radical feminism by making us, you know, look kind of, you know, secretive and all the rest of it. We looked like we were the BNP, but obviously it was something that we had to do, because if we'd gone public with the next venue, the same thing would have happened. And it's interesting how that has been something that has happened routinely now since sort of 2017, 2018, with groups not making the venue public. But I think because we were the first ones, to my knowledge, that happened to, a lot of women weren't with us. So I'm just so grateful for those women who were very involved at the time. And the event did go ahead. We had about 150 women, which was really something. Yeah. And then Sheila, in particular, I remember on the second day, it just did this barnstorming, like this fantastic speech, because there was a lot of woolly thinking about it, a lot of uncertainty. You know, women really didn't know what to think about it. And I just remember that event, I just felt everyone, well, not everyone, a lot of the women there sort of started off over here. And then by the end of the weekend, they were over here and they really had clarity about it. I've probably used up all my time talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
No, you're fine. I haven't
got 5 minutes.
I haven't really yeah. I think we've got a bit more time. But so is there videos of that? Or was that before all this time?
So frustrating. Someone did film the whole thing, and then she never let me she said there was a problem with it, and she never I was never able to get the video. It was kind of in the early days before things were routinely filmed. So we made sure that we had the Thinking Differently conference, which in a way was 4 years later, was in a way the kind of follow-up event, but that focused absolutely on like a feminist analysis of transgenderism. And that actually, you know, that was held at Conway Hall, because I think by then they had a different, they certainly had a very helpful woman. I won't mention her name. I don't know if she'd want to be mentioned, but she was very helpful, and she was on the board there, and she was determined that they would, you know, make amends for what had happened before. And we gave it this very innocuous title of Thinking Differently. And we were perfectly public about it. And for some reason, we didn't get that kind of, we weren't besieged and attacked in the way that we had been before, and the other things had been after. So those really powerful presentations, including Sheila, Mary Lou Singleton, Leah Keith, Stephanie Davis-Arai, because Transgender Trend had got going by then. There are a lot of really excellent presentations. They're all on YouTube. They're on actually my old YouTube channel that I don't really use now.
Yeah, I found your YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's still up there. So that, and I really would like to put on the map that was the first ever feminist conference devoted to an analysis of the politics of transgenderism. I'm really so very sort of happy and proud that we did that, especially having had that earlier experience. But what I should maybe briefly say is that time, I think it would be really good to do some historical work on that, because that time of 2012, it was the era of a lot of radical feminist blogs that we don't really see now. That era is not really around anymore. But there was the amazing Gallus Mag, who did Gender Trender. Again, very, very forthright, far more forthright than, you know, a lot of those involved now. She didn't go along with all this kind of nicey, softly approach at all. There was Radfem Hub. You know, there were a lot of different Radfem blogs, and there were a lot of different radical feminist conferences as well that was similarly attacked. There was, you know, there were several in the US. There were, I don't know, at least a couple in Australia. So, and there were more here as well from like 2013, 2014, 2015. You know, there were more going on here, and that was a really important time. That that again, anything that was women only would just be absolutely attacked, not only by all these awful men and their handmaidens, but kind of more broadly by a lot of supposedly feminist groups as well. Really awful. And that preceded even the event organised by, well, that was an era that led up to the 2016 Thinking Differently conference, and we'd had a couple of other actions which I could talk about, but run out of time. And then obviously 2017 was when Venice Allen and a couple of her sort of associates, who again might not be appropriate to mention, but it wasn't just Venice, it was the three of them organising it. They organised the event at the Women's University Library, obviously then, where we had to meet at Hyde Park, and where at least two men assaulted Maria McLachlan, and one of them at least went to trial for that. And then I think it was later that same year that there was the first Women's Place UK event, and then over from sort of 2018 you started to get more of these real life events, but they were all really besieged, both the ones that Venice, and then I think Venice and Kelly J organised, and the Women's Place UK, and some other groups as well.
But they kind of came out of the Gender Recognition Act consultation, didn't they? That was 2018, well, and that's when they kind of kicked off.
They'd started before that, because that was kind of I don't know, spring summer of 2018, and obviously the Women's University Library, Venice's one, that was 2017.
No, I mean the Women's Place UK.
No, Women's Place UK started late 2017 as well, around about October, right. I think it was, yeah.
Right.
And I know at least one member of Women's Place UK had come to Thinking Differently, and also things have been happening online. I mean, there's so much to say about this, but actually we really should do some more work, those of us who are around then, to document it, because obviously there's been a lot going on Mumsnet, and then some of those groups started up Facebook groups. I'm not so aware, there'd be other women who could say more about what was happening on Twitter, but there were groups around, like the Fair Play for Women, that started off as very much focused around sport. That was all happening before the consultation, but then I guess really got going at the time of the consultation. But I think what happened, there was this broadening, a lot more women kind of coming to it through these different groups, but there was also a marginalization of the more forthright, kind of clear position that we'd had earlier, because I remember having really futile arguments with some of these women in Facebook groups, because they were all still very much like, they wanted Hayton to be involved, they wanted Harrison to be involved, and Miranda Yardley, and all these kind of characters, and they would all absolutely, not all, a lot of them would fawn over these men and call them she. I mean, that, and if I objected, or if there was a number of us who would object to calling them she, and then basically that we were terrible, So it was interesting. There was definitely a broadening of the movement, big broadening of the movement, but at the same time, a lot of the women who are coming into it, and particularly those then who very quickly assumed, prominent positions with, I don't know, blogs and setting up groups and things like that, actually, I feel did not serve us well in terms of their language or their analysis. So, and we've seen
that's your thing, isn't it? The language. Well, you've done some really good
crucial.
WDI.
It's really crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And obviously, we, those of us here coming from a radical feminist background, we've got a radical feminist analysis. But even if you've got a basic common sense understanding of how language works, you don't use the language, all these fake terms, and all these fake pronouns adopted by the very movement that you're trying to resist and challenge, and you don't speak their language. And as soon as you speak their language, then you're doing their work for them. Even if you're arguing against it, you're accepting the terms or their terms of what you can
Yes,
say.
the rules
And
of
to me,
engagement.
it's such an obvious thing that you don't have to be a radical feminist. That is just really, really obvious to me. But anyway, yeah, well, if we do any more of this, there were women who are now lesbians who are now involved in Lesbian Rights Alliance, Lynn Hahn and Elaine Hutton. There was a group of us who protested at a Dyke March. That was in 2014. A group of us who were handing out leaflets, Reclaim the Night, warning women about all these violent men who say they're women. And we were so attacked for that at the after party, the organisers of Reclaim the Night actually apologised to women there, for us giving out these leaflets. And then everyone kind of cheered when she said, "Oh, trans women are welcome here." So, and that was supposed to be, a feminist event, a women-only event with the radical feminist roots. So it's very interesting the shift that has happened. That's 10 years ago now. Anyway, there's plenty more to say, but that's kind of a bit of
there always is. There always is. There's so much. There is so much. Need to write a book.
Well, actually, because there is a little bit of revisionism going on, I think, in some of the historical accounts. There's a little bit of amnesia going on, so maybe it is worth sort of putting a history together. I think, because I think it's important for women to know where these ideas have come from and where the resistance has come from. Because if you block that, you block their access to very, very important ideas and very important history. Anyway, I'll leave it there.